Hello and welcome to the Smarter Tech Podcast. I'm here with Shannon Rowan, who is a Wi-Fi refugee, but also an EMF awareness educator and author. She has a professional background in photojournalism and editorial writing, and we're going to talk about electro-sensitivity, other things she's been doing, and I know she's been doing interviews and writing. So, welcome to a fellow EMF awareness educator. I'm very glad that you're doing this, and I'm very glad to have this conversation finally with you.
Thank you, Nick. I really appreciate you having me on. I'm excited to talk with you today.
Yes, well, it's my pleasure, really. And I don't know where to start. I guess just people who aren't familiar with your work. You're more than an electrosensitive. What's your professional background? What are you passionate about? And how did you come to, be an EMF awareness educator yourself?
Yeah, well, I started off in photojournalism, and so also editorial writing, like you said. And I actually was in advertising for a little while as well, with photography, commercial advertising. I worked in a studio in New York City. Yeah, I was on that kind of path at first, and then I deviated into journalism, and I've had many other kind of side careers as a kind of struggling artist. I've always just considered myself more of an artist, and so I'm a writer and artist. I did a lot of dance professionally, and I had a dog walking business. So I've kind of done a lot of different things and traveled a lot. And but I became an EMF educator because of my own experiences being, I would say, poisoned by the radiation. So, we were talking a little bit off air about like what to call it, and I think people say electrosensitive, but I always try to tell people that it was really called microwave sickness or microwave injury or microwave syndrome when people were first getting affected by these exposures. So, it gradually morphed into this other term, which is either electrosensitivity, electrohypersensitivity, electromagnetic sensitivity. And it kind of focuses to me too much on this idea of just that I'm sensitive. So it's my problem and not and that's how the journey I've had has been that, like, really. And when I first got really sick and poisoned, it happened with the 4G rollout in Washington, D.C., where I was living at the time. It was 4G and smart meters and a smartphone all kind of at the same time. And that was when it was too much for me. And so I really see this as like a threshold kind of exposure problem. So we're all sensitive to it because we're all humans. We're all biological creatures. Every life form is sensitive to this because we are meant to be sensitive to the fields because the Earth has a natural electromagnetic field, which supports life. And so we're meant to be sensitive to these frequencies. And so these frequencies, I think, overwhelm us biologically, and some more than others, some sooner than others, but eventually it takes its toll because I think we're all trying to compensate for the exposures. So that's the game we're playing, like compensation versus exposure. And so for me, I couldn't kind of keep that balancing act. And so then it went to overexposure, went to hypersensitivity. What you could call it that. I still don't really mind that term because I am reacting in a sense that I have this sensitivity where I react to it. It almost feels like to me, I've come to see it as a gift because I've learned to avoid exposures that are harmful. And so when I was first affected, and I knew it was affecting me because I couldn't deny how I was feeling holding the phone, being near the phone, being near cell towers, being near Wi-Fi, it was clear that was harming me and I could feel it immediately. So I had to start taking like drastic measures for myself to get out of the pain, which really felt like torture, and it still can. I'm just fortunate that I've found a refuge to get away from it. So I wrote my book, Wi-Fi Refugee, Plight of the Modern-day Canary, as a way to, tell my story and also educate others, because it was really hard and lonely. And I think it is hard and lonely for people struggling with this to explain to other people because it's so ubiquitous now and everybody's so used to it and, has a hard time understanding how you could be reacting to something that's just kind of like water to most people. It's just there, it's like electricity is there and what's wrong with it, and so it's been a long journey. It's been about 10 years now that I've been dealing with this and trying and having to move a lot and trying to educate people. But this kind of launched me into a lot of other writing and research and kind of back to that journalist profession that I started out with. So it's sort of comes full circle. So I probably answered a little more than you need it, but that kind of, we can talk more about, things I brought up if you'd like.
Yeah, no worries at all. And recently I was in communication with who I consider one of the most important EMF scientists in biophysics that is currently publishing still a lot to this day, Dr. Dimitris J. Panagopoulos from the University of Athens. And I will have a separate episode on it, so I won't, burn all the good information. But one thing that I wanted to read from what he sent me, I don't think he would mind. He said, a relatively mild such pathology is what is called electro-hypersensitivity, even if we want to call it, poisoning or anything. He said, actually, in my view, this is not a pathology, but a healthy reaction to an unnatural exposure, which is the totally polarized and coherent man-made EMFs. If the person does not reduce the exposure at the early stages, the initial healthy reaction, which is normal, again, not, a pathology, something you would expect to happen, may become a serious pathology with unbearable symptoms. So it was a reminder for me that who I consider the top scientists in biophysics and how anything living should react to these human-made EMFs. He says this is a healthy reaction. This is to be expected based on what we know on how cells react to something that is in the environment. And it's almost like Professor Ole Johansson told me at one point. You'll probably agree with that, but maybe we can continue the conversation there. He said, "Well, Nick, it makes me wonder if everyone, aside from those we call electrosensitive, aren't hyposensitive. They don't react enough to an exposure that is toxic." What do you think of this? I think increasingly we have people that, call themselves electrosensitive. Are these just the people that had a healthy reaction to that radiation and eventually will all fall in that category?
Yeah, actually, I've become good friends with Ole. I interviewed him for my book, and he kind of pointed that out to me as well. I agree because, what's been interesting is I realized when I came to this level of like becoming like a pathology when it hadn't been, I had always noticed some reaction to the exposures, but I ignored it. So I think that I pushed it aside because we're taught to do that in our cultures, to ignore the pain and push through it and, be a tough guy, try to, just work ethic. And this country is like kind of out of control. It kind of comes before almost everything else, and I learned that living abroad in different cultures that people put more emphasis on social time and interaction and having meals and, and relaxation time. And Americans are like, your identity is sort of wrapped up in your profession and how well you do in that. So I feel like that influenced me personally. I was always trying to succeed, and I would kind of just push that aside. And when it got so bad, I just knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. But I had been doing that. And so some people, when I start telling them about my symptoms, my reactions, said, I always noticed that too. When I hold the phone in my head, like it heats, kind of feels weird, and I don't really like it. And, but they don't really see that as a big problem. It's like more of a little inconvenience or something, right? But as it builds over time and you get more exposures, then it can be. And I also feel like, so part of me that thinks like for us to react in a healthy way to anything is sort of an abnormality in today's world, because I also react to chemical exposures, which are literally poisons, which everybody should be reacting to. But I think because we're so desensitized, they're calling me hypersensitive, but people as a whole are desensitized in our society. They are very drugged. Everybody's on a pharmaceutical or multiple or recreational drugs, or somehow self-medicating because they're in pain. They're in chronic pain. I mean, we're seeing just explosion of chronic pain. Why are we all in pain? Is that a natural condition? I don't think it used to be. That seems like there's an environmental problem, but it's in the favor of industry for us to react this way, to ignore it. And they sort of help teach us that, that it's make fun of people maybe who are reacting, who are having a natural reaction, that kind of thing. So I think, what's healthy? What do we measure health as in our society that's very unhealthy? Maybe a healthy person looks abnormal.
Yeah. Well, it's already the case. It's already the case, right? With over 60% of children that either have a chronic disease or obesity. It's even, the generation of children, at least in the US, looks like they're gonna die prematurely compared to even the previous generation. So it's not going well. Being very, very healthy or not having cancer in your lifetime is becoming something that is a feat almost, right? So it's we have, you kind of smile. I say that's the kind of reaction I have. I have to laugh about it because it's so absurd, and people somehow think, oh, this is mysterious, right? The environmental causes of cancer, the environmental causes of MS and of I don't know, all these new chronic diseases that are increasing and exploding, and it's all mysterious. Well, what's not mysterious is that there's a bunch of new things we introduce in the environment within the last 50 years and 100 years, if you want to go that far. But now we're just making it more complicated to study, and it's very tough. Maybe something that I think would provide a lot of value, and I don't know if that's skipping ahead too much, but everyone that is, let's say, reacting to EMFs one way or another, has these EMF-related symptoms, is always asking me, ask the person what they did, what they tried. And of course, to me, this has a limit because, of course, what works for you doesn't necessarily work for everyone, but they want to know, what have you done to manage yourself, manage your condition, if you want to call it that, or make sure that you can still be healthy. So I think part of it was you relocating, but that's probably not the only thing you did, correct?
Yeah, I definitely tried a lot of things. I wanted to stay in my home. I wanted to stay. I had a career, I had a business, I had friends. I wasn't trying, the immediate reaction was not to leave. So I did a lot of things the first year, which helped to some degree, but not enough. And ultimately, my partner and I just said, we got to get out. I'm not getting better enough. Like, it was getting worse. I was getting migraines almost every day. It was debilitating, and I knew where the migraines were coming from. And so at least a few times a week. So it was just getting, so I wasn't functioning. And even though I had built a Faraday cage around the bed, and it helped me sleep better, it definitely made a difference there. And I tried grounding techniques, and but I was so overwhelmed that I think even like I started different kind of regimes with diet and detoxing, but I'd always been doing that kind of thing, because what I realized after I got out of all this and I got away from it, I had been suffering from these exposures for a long time before, and I didn't understand my symptoms were related, and I always had these mystery problems I was trying to solve. I was a very healthy kind of person in my lifestyle, like no drugs, no alcohol, no caffeine, no sugar. I was health, like a health nut, like I'm going crazy trying to be healthy because it was kind of a struggle for me, so I had these kind of complaints of like not being able to gain weight. I was very underweight. I couldn't figure that out. I had joint pains, muscle pains, chronic hair falling out, kind of, which is a radiation, symptom right there, but affecting my thyroid and, all these issues. I went to lots of doctors. So finally, when we moved, my partner and I moved several times, but we ended up in Arizona for a while in a very remote rural area. And as I was dealing with, like, I thought it was about curing my condition. I thought if I can get away from it enough, I could go back and maybe live in the world in a normal way again, or semi-normal, So I thought I just definitely need the break. And I was right. And my body had to have that break to be able to do anything. If you want to detox, rebuild, and all this, I feel like the first step is to get away from the exposures as much as possible. Yeah. So, but over time, after I did get away from it, I realized all these other things were linked, because now that I live off the power grid, I don't have neighbors. I'm in a pretty ideal situation, which is hard to come by, and it took several years to come by this. I finally gained weight again. All these other problems I was having cleared up. In addition to, I still react to EMFs, but it's not as intense. It's not as bad. But then I always have the recovery time where I live. So that's key. To me, like avoidance is really the first thing as much as you can. Again, it's getting harder and harder, but that was the first thing for me. First I gave up my cell phone. That was hard to do. I was trying to minimize my exposure with it. I was texting instead of calling, but even that hurt. I finally said, I can't do it. I had to kind of retrain my friends and things to like contact me in email or my home phone. I had a landline still at the time. And then I just from there kind of, there were some changes I made there. And then, but now it's like no wireless, anything, first of all. I also, I learned that other electricity exposure, electromagnetic fields were a problem, not just wireless. That seemed to be the main issue at first, but then I realized it was other things, like people don't often look at dirty electricity in their homes. So that came up, and that was a problem for me in Arizona because we were in a rural community, but often the dirty electricity can be bad because you have people using irrigation systems on these big farms, which is where we were. And so I had trouble because there was these big transformers, right by the house, like lots of them for the irrigation wells and everything, and really had a hard time with those exposures and hard to mitigate them. So, but other things I've done while I was resting, recovering, getting away from this, I also did a lot of detoxes because I do think there's a relationship between, because what I'm seeing it as is an overexposure that the body can't handle of some kind of poisons, right? So when you couple that, if you've got radiation poisoning plus chemical poisoning plus heavy metal poisoning, obviously you want to relieve your body and like your detoxification organs like the liver and the kidneys, and so to me, I did like things that for me, I did like liver cleanse kind of things that were gentle. What I've learned with all this, and I really want to emphasize, is to do it very gently because, fighting back with like a same intensity as you're getting attacked with often backfires, and you're not really helping the situation by because you end up attacking your body in a similar way that you're being attacked, so to me, it's like changing our attitude and relationship with ourselves and our bodies for like a very much self-love, self-care, not instead of like my body's the enemy and it's doing something wrong and I need to fight it, so to me, I think our whole medical kind of paradigm is like focus on the enemy in your body and destroy it. And so I try not to do that. And so I found that the best techniques were like gentle detoxes like sweating, and also so I did do liver, like coffee enemas very gently as well, and some juicing. I don't advocate like fasting because it's very taxing you're basically starving yourself. And, you could do a meal, maybe have juice for breakfast or something a couple times, but like to go prolonged, days without eating or drinking, I think it's going to be harder. So I don't like to do things like that. I've taken charcoal and I've taken clay, and I think that's helped. But really now I just feel like if I maintain a really balanced kind of diet and don't do any kind of crazy fad things, with diet or with anything, I'm very like, and sleep patterns were a big deal for me. Like, same bedtime, same waking time, every day. And like, I had bad habits before that, and so I had to break those. And blue light exposures, blue light at night, trying to minimize that, and wearing blue blocking glasses. I mean, I've definitely found certain tools like that really helpful. I've done some shielding clothing at times, but it's just any kind of pendants or shielding stuff is to me, it's just not a very significant change enough, that hasn't helped in any really tangible way that helps as much as just getting away from the problem. You're kind of putting a Band-Aid on it is what it feels like for me, so that's my experience. I mean, I have in my book, I have 100 pages of research. Like I ended up making this appendix of like all kind of how to help people, after the whole story. So I have a lot of this detailed in there, like what I've tried with supplements or diet or, with the saunas and I still feel like probably the sauna gently, because you don't want to get dehydrated, was one of the best things, probably was in terms of a detox. I take help often, pretty frequently. I'm just really focused on, I grow a lot of my own food now. I'm fortunate to do that. So in the summer, we eat all of our own homegrown produce all
Wow,
summer,
that's
and
nice.
which all of it, it's like we don't buy any produce anymore for the almost 6 months. We don't have to buy produce. And then we also have, I'm expanding my medicinal herb gardens. So I have a lot of medicines that are, that I'm growing myself and trying out. But I'm really fortunate. I have somewhere I can really recover with rest. I mean, sleeping is so, getting good sleep and finding a way to do that is how we can recover. Because when I do go to town, which now can function a lot better in terms of like, I can go to town, I can do, I mean, my first year, I couldn't go to, my partner had to actually do all the shopping, drive everywhere. I couldn't even drive a car. I was so sick, I was so overwhelmed from these exposures. I couldn't
How does
even
that
drive a
look
car.
like? Like, how did that look like for you? Was it that it was triggering headaches or migraines while driving, something that would make me unable to drive for sure? Uh, but what was your experience going back in a city at that point?
Yeah, it was like whole body sickness. It was not even just like a headache or one thing. It was kind of like an overwhelming feeling. And so I found that in the car, I had to ride in the back of the car because I was having trouble with like the battery in the front, the things in the front of the car. And these are old vehicles. I can't I mean, I was in a Prius a couple of years ago briefly, and I got so sick in it. I cannot handle, the electric vehicles are like really going to be a problem if they keep continuing. There's so many reasons I think that they're not the way to go, but one of them
Mm.
is, definitely these exposures are going to harm everyone, but it's going to be impossible for somebody like me to drive if I'm forced into an electric vehicle, so, it's just out of the question. I mean, I still can this is interesting too. I used to think I was just getting like a weird car sickness I would fall asleep. I used to fall asleep at the wheel I couldn't drive more than an hour straight. I would just fall asleep. And now I understand it's the EMFs that did that. It kind of like, made me really groggy and like unable to focus. And what happens, I've learned from, I think it was Sam Milham who wrote Dirty Electricity, is that when the tires rotate, when you go up to speeds of 60 miles an hour or more, because this was always happening on the highway especially, you get a field that's created because the tires now have, they used to have fiberglass, and now they have metals in them. And so that friction and that, is creating this field effect. And so it causes car sickness, and like people get nauseous. So when you think it's motion sickness, it's not necessarily, it could be infrasound, which happens on the highway a lot with the bigger trucks and things. So that creates nausea. So I'm starting to link these other things. Again, I'm linking all these things from my past to these exposures now that I understand it better. And I think people just they're not trained to look at things that way. So they don't link their illnesses with these exposures, even from a common cold to allergy to whatnot, all these things are possible effects. But when I was trying to just use a vehicle or go to the city, when I would go into any town, just driving into the town as a passenger, I would feel a pressure building. And I still have that happen. There's a kind of pressure. It's a little hard to describe. It's in my head, but it's just sort of the whole body, but definitely more focused in my head. But it just kind of builds. I notice now I feel it as soon as I'm like on the highway. And I think the highway, because of power lines, sometimes because of other vehicles and what they've got in their vehicles and how close we get to them. Our own cars, it gets, we go faster. But when I get to town, I kind of relax a little bit more, but then I feel something else. But then I know now I can like adapt better in terms of compensating when I'm in the exposure. So my body will react, and then I kind of relax, and then I get really tired. So now it's not so severe in terms of like really intense pain, but I do get really exhausted easily, and then I have to recover. And I notice the longer I'm in town one day, the more recovery time I need the next day, and where I'm very tired. I feel hungover. And this is just a small town. I sometimes go to bigger cities and it's worse there, of course, and it's more recovery. But it's been a long time since I've really been in like very big cities. So I don't really even know how that would feel.
Yeah, I can only imagine how you would feel, Times Square, New York City, for example. I mean, you used to be in New York, right? I
Yeah.
went by New York recently and going to North Carolina and driving, and I saw New York just thinking about the type of EMF density you have there. Montreal is pretty bad also, don't get me wrong, but it's just another level with the density of population. Is the same thing in large cities that I've seen and experienced. Uh, Personally, I still am able to handle these environments, but it used to be a little bit worse for me. I feel like if I have more resilience built in, I'm able to feel these exposures less, but I'm under no illusion that I'm impervious to this type of EMF damage. And in fact, just reading again the biophysics, Panagopoulos was talking about the fact that the experiments he did on fruit flies clearly showed that when you have multiple stressors, for example, one of them was wireless communications plus other genotoxic exposures such as ionizing radiation you might get if you fly, plus caffeine, you have basically a multiplication effect. And you just use caffeine as an example. And I think I was dry. I almost spit out my coffee reading that paper. I said, oh my God, what am I doing? And the idea is not necessarily that caffeine is dangerous per se, but since it's a stressor and we add it to other stressors, the point is, 1 plus 1 plus 1 all of a sudden makes 9. And you say, wait, what happened, right? Why are people so ill? And the explanation lies in the amount of stressors that we are subject to. And it just seems like once you've hit a certain threshold, it's very, very difficult to find your balance. But what I gather from your story, though, is also there's hope because you were able to find your resilience and rebuild your resilience to some extent. And still, I guess you're always managing yourself and finding your happy middle where you are still able to go to a grocery store, and that's good because I've heard all sorts of stories. I was just reading the last few days have been kind of tough reading emails because I was communicating with Phil Inlay, who's a extremely sick individual from the UK, and he used to be in the news in around 2010, 2012 about his condition. He wanted to talk about, his Wi-Fi allergy, and he made it to a few small documentaries. He's still on the road. He's still trying to figure things out. Now he's short on money, feeling sick as ever, and he has not found, even throughout the last 15 years, he has not found his balance. He was not able to find a spot where he can live, he can feel good, and he can still have access to food, shelter, just the basics that a human being needs to thrive. And it just broke my heart. I'm trying to help him the best I can, but he's just, if on top of it, you're in financial difficulties, it can just become hell. And I get communications every month from such individuals, and I'm almost, feel a wave of despair myself about, okay, what can I do? I tell them to, my question for you is this. Have you consulted a doctor about this, about electro hypersensitivity? Because that's about, like, I think everyone tells me about their horror stories. Part of it is the horror they felt when someone in front of them that's a medical professional told them you're crazy. And sometimes, it's almost the part, it seems like it was one of the most painful thing to go through is having people kind of, reject you in that way and say, oh no, it doesn't exist, right? You're kind of just in psychosis right now.
Yeah, well, I knew better than to consult a doctor when I started going through this because I'd already faced that many times before with just the other symptoms that were mysterious to me. And they say, you're perfectly healthy, you're a hypochondriac, and I'm like, well, I don't feel perfectly healthy. I don't know what your standard of health is, but obviously we disagree there or something. And I had before that, when I reacted to cigarette smoke, I was considered very strange then too. And now everybody knows how bad it is. And I had a doctor tell me that it's not possible to have an allergy to cigarette smoke. That's the reaction I got. I was trying to get help for what I considered an allergy. Yeah. And I thought, what? Like, it's not a real, of course it's real. And I actually even got him to question, because when I told him my symptoms, he's like, huh, because it didn't sound like a psychosomatic thing anymore, And so, but now everybody knows, and I see the same thing happening now. Eventually, enough people will know, maybe we'll have policy changes, and then they'll say, I wasn't, so I had definitely had the reaction from friends. I had eventually I went to a doctor who was aware of this problem, because I needed an official diagnosis that I could use legally. I was trying to keep my home at the time from smart meters going on in Arizona. So I had somebody, an MD, diagnose me, with this EMFs, I guess is the official, electromagnetic sensitivity that you use in official documents, and also MCS, multiple chemical sensitivity. I mean, there's that word again, which is like, doesn't make it sound very serious. When it can be debilitating. I also have had a lot of contacts after I wrote my book, and I've been on podcasts. People contact me as well with their stories, and I've tried to help as many as I can, but it's hard because the main question is, where do they go? And I don't know the answer, because I can't host anybody here. We caretake a property. It's not our property. There's no neighboring properties. Like, I don't, if I had to face that again, I don't know where I would go. So it's really, really hard. That's the question, because I think this is why I have my sanity and my strength and my resiliency, is having the refuge I found. Other people have, like Keith Cutter, he's shielded his home and he's done well that way. So that can work in some cases.
Yeah.
I also had financial difficulties. I mean, all of this has been a huge financial strain. Nobody compensates us when we lose jobs. We have to relocate. There's not like anybody's helping me in the government with that. I don't get paid for any of my losses. So I have to kind of like make it happen again and be creative and figure it out. And we're always kind of struggling, financially. But I've met people kill themselves because of this, because it's too hard and they get so lonely. I think a lot of it is because of not feeling supported, not knowing where to go. And also, when you do live out of your car for a long time or out of a little trailer or something, it takes a toll on your health in other ways, because you're having to like survive. You're just in survival mode. You don't get to relax. You don't eat well. You don't have good heating. You're exposed a lot to the elements. So it can really take a toll on your health that way. And that's why I presented some of these stories in my book of other people, because I wanted to show the variations of like what people go through, and also that it affects all kinds of people, different ages, different sexes, different races, different parts of the world. It's not really limited to one demographic. So I think it's really important for people to know that, and to know that it could happen to them. It could happen at any time, really. And so we need to support each other and help each other. I think it helps to have a sense of purpose too, because you lose that as well when you lose kind of your job and your friends and your family and your home. And so for me, I needed to write about this, and I need to do podcasts, because it helps me feel like I'm doing something about it. And it helps me give me a sense of purpose, because there is a spiritual aspect to this and our world. And people's spirits can really, when you have purpose, that really strengthens you physically as well. And so I really encourage people to find purpose in their existence, whatever situation they're in, and, meet that challenge and really like work towards something that you feel is making a contribution.
Hey, let me interrupt this podcast for just a second. I want to tell you about one of the EMF protection or health supporting tools I really believe in, and which also helped me finance the costs associated with creating this show. In the last several years, I said no to the vast majorities of companies who asked me to endorse their so-called EMF blocking products. And there's a lot of products out there, including EMF blocking cases, platforms, clothing, you name it, that are very poorly designed and could in fact expose you to more EMFs when you use them. So essentially doing more harm than good. So which I don't want for any of my readers and followers. Shield Your Body is a company that is one of their rare exceptions, and that does things the right way. The company has been created by R. Blank, who is the son of the famous EMF scientist Dr. Martin Blank from Columbia University. And R is an expert at what he does and is also a true, honest EMF educator that is completely aligned with my recommendations and values. So yes, it's true that reducing your time of use from your phone and other devices and creating distance from them, like using speakerphone on a phone, for example, will always remain your first line of defense against EMF effects. But the reality is that certain products that are properly designed can help you reduce your exposure and your risks associated with this technology even further. So Shield Your Body designs the only solutions I'm currently endorsing to help you carry your cell phone more safely. So those so-called phone cases. And to learn more, visit shieldyourbody.com and enter the coupon EMF Guy to get 15% off your entire order. That's shieldyourbody.com with the coupon code EMF Guy. Back to the podcast. Yes, well, Phil, that I'll answer him today. I'll try to help him, and he told me I hope to build my resilience enough to be on your podcast. Of course, I invited him. The reality is he feels very sick these days, and getting on a computer is probably not a good idea for him. So I guess he needs to help himself first. But it's inspiring. Thank you. It's very touching to me, this conversation. And then just thinking about my first interview that really shocked me. I wrote my book in 2017, and in 2018, I talked with Maria August. And the year after that, she killed herself. And some people are aware of that story. I can link to the interview. She was such a good soul, and one of the only electro hypersensitive individuals or sick individuals from that technology, whatever you want to call it, who told me, Nick, I like the title of your book, the non-tinfoil guide to EMFs. And she got it. She got the humor in it. She got the sarcasm in a sense that I was trying to convey. And then others were writing to me saying, you're laughing at us and how you're using it, you're making it a joke. So I guess it's different people understood the French Canadian humor, kind of sarcastic, and others not so much. And I felt bad about it at one point, but I felt a little bit comforted and said, well, she is sick with this condition, and she is literally, her life is being destroyed by it, and she finds the humor in it. And I found that so beautiful. And I was devastated when she decided to end her life, of course, but at the same time, she didn't have any pleasure anymore. There was really no reason for her. It was constant suffering, and I was communicating with her mom at the time. So a very bizarre situation for me as, just one guy on one topic, a citizen journalist from Montreal, working from my bedroom most days. It's, what am I doing? I'm trying to help this person I don't know. And I felt very awkward about it, trying to do my best. I sent her some supplements that she needed, and, but in the end, it's just, I felt like everyone in the community just had this big shock when she decided to go. And of course, we want to save everyone, but this is a huge can of worms to open to try to save everyone. And I think it was part of my journey. You talk about, the spiritual aspect to this. Part of my journey was accepting that, yes, I tried to take the weight of the world on my shoulders, but it's too much to bear for one person. So let's just try to do your best. You cannot save everyone, and you can try to help, but I guess it's almost like the journey that anyone who wants to be a healer or educator goes through. Are you responsible for your students? Are you responsible if people don't follow your advice? Are you responsible if people are sick? No, you got to do your best, and you got to also help yourself first. So I feel you on this aspect of, the spiritual aspect to it. I feel like this topic chose me in a sense. And I do feel, though, that these stories still to this day shake me to my core. It's tough to read these things, and I'll continue to, feature these kind of messages on my podcast for this very reason. Is there any part of the discussion that you wanted to, one last 5-minute bout you wanted to talk about, an important message about what you lived or about your book, or if you want to address people who might suffer from this technology directly, tell them advice? I'll give you the mic here for the closing words.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I know Maria's story well. It's actually in my book. And she even came, okay. I didn't meet her personally, but she met like a neighbor of ours. She was going to come try our community out, and I think didn't make it or didn't work for her.
Yeah.
I sympathize because, and I've been there, and I think a lot of us, and I address that in my book because it's a real thing. It's like when you come to that feeling like you don't want to do it anymore. And I think it's better to acknowledge it and talk about it. I think it's like, I think about the future sometimes. I try not to too much because I'm trying to stop a lot of this proliferation of this technology and increase of it. And I'm writing another book right now about tech addiction, trying to get people to see that issue and what it's doing to our environment too, because there's all this, and I won't go into it now, it takes too long, but I've been really I get my days where I just start crying and grieving, because for the loss, for the impact this is having on innocent life, on animals, on children, on so many people, so many animals, so much of our world that's so beautiful that I want to save, but I can't take it all on myself. And we do have to help ourselves first, or we can't be any good to anybody. So I have to watch like how much of this information I take in at what time, and if I'm not rested enough, and I'm, because it's hard to recognize. It can sneak up on you, and suddenly you just can't function, and you feel like that despair, so you got to watch yourself. And I mean, I think I don't really want to live in a world that is going to be a dystopian, smart city nightmare that if I'm forced off of the land and into that, I rather wouldn't be here for it. I don't know I would take my own life, but I understand that, and that's sort of like any wild creature, human, animal. I mean, we're wild, we could be, I think that's what we're missing, and we want back, that connection with nature and wilderness, that part of us that's been so domesticated that we're so sick, and so as we get kind of pushed off the land more and more, as industry like overtakes the natural world, it's very shakes us. And I think spiritually, because that is a spiritual soul connection to our natural world that is being tethered. That is why most people are depressed, because we are severed, and that we are severed from that, and we're tethered to technology more and more, into virtual worlds, and it's not healthy. It doesn't make us feel fulfilled or satisfied or happy. And so, yeah, I could never judge anybody for doing what Maria did. I understand that. And I don't, like I said, if it doesn't switch around and we don't wake up and do something, I don't really want to be around. I don't want to be here if there's not any joy, I mean, that's what we feel like. So we need to bring that back. And I also feel like having a sense of humor is really important. And I do get the title of your book, and I appreciate it. And I'm not offended by it, but I hope people don't take me the wrong way either when I laugh a lot, because there is a kind of absurdity in a lot of things happening, when you kind of have that perspective on it. I feel like a kind of a Buddhist, kind of laughing Buddha perspective of like the illusion of this world and the madness in it and everything. And you have to step out of that sometimes and get perspective and realize that you're an eternal being having an experience here. And, what we need, all we can do is, like, if you look at it in a karmic way, is like, do your best not to incur more bad karma, and to like treat each other kindly and with love and respect in everything we do. And I think that's what we should be focusing on. If everybody started to look, approach their lives and what they do with integrity, with a sense of sense of right and wrong, and just treating each other in the world with respect. It would be a lot better. So we can only start with ourselves and our small influence, and that would then snowball and ricochet, and we could, change the world that way. But yeah, I guess, I mean, that's all I can say about it is, find your joy in what you can, and, live as best you can with what you have, and yeah, just keep going, but there is light. I mean, there's this stuff is encroaching everywhere, but I'm doing better. I mean, I'm doing better. I'm like better than I was 10 years ago. And there's way more of this stuff everywhere, so clearly like there is some hope there. I mean, at some point it might overwhelm me again where I can't, find a way out of it. And I don't know what I'll be saying then, but, but the point is that, it is possible. And there's always changes we can make to improve. And, but when our time, maybe there's a limit on it too. And when our time's up, it's up, but this isn't everything to me. This life isn't forever, so yeah.
Well, you're inspiring others through your messages. I'm glad that, not only have you built your own resilience, but you decided to spread this message. So being an author, being on podcast, this is so important. You're doing very important work. The only question that came to mind as a last, rapid fire is what is your computer setup? How are you able to do interviews without feeling too groggy afterwards or too buzzed?
It's because I write on it too, and so I'm actually have a lot of computer exposure. I used to use desktops, but I can't do that off grid. With the desktop, actually, desktop was kind of more problematic. It's a lot more EMF coming off of the hard drive. I sat really far away from it. The laptop, I can get a little distance, and it's really old. It's 12 years old or something. So I keep replacing old laptops. They don't last very long, but it's been better than getting a new one for me because of all the extra stuff. So I can still like use Ethernet and USB, and I can, have the internet modem really far away from me, and everything is wired here. And I have a blue light blocking program on it. I usually use glasses too, but in the interviews, it usually gets too much glare, so I can handle the interview for a while. It makes a big difference to wear the glasses and I would say just the cheap ones, $12, Amazon gaming glasses work great. You don't have to spend a lot of money on it. I have a free, program, Flex. I've used Iris as well. So I definitely take breaks. To me, it's like I have to if I do a couple hours on the computer writing, then I go outside and I go in my garden.
Got it.
And I work in the garden. And then this is how we have to do it. Like you have to pace yourself, and you have to take breaks, and you have to take walks and get in nature for so many reasons. Like it's even just that trying, not getting sucked into the kind of virtual disconnected, world on the internet versus the real world. And so kind of always keeping yourself grounded in that sense, not just literally grounded touching the earth, but like grounded in being in the physical world. Right. So it's definitely because of that, keeping that balance, I'm able to do it for sure.
I'm glad. This morning I went on a run here in Sherbrooke. It's a large city, but there's a wood, and running in the wood, trail running, I love it so much. It was raining, I was all muddy, but I need that. I after that I said, oh my God, it's been days. I've been in front of the computer a lot. I had a lot of work this week, and I did feel, I don't know, unmotivated, and I don't want to do this interview. Well, guess what, Nick? You've been, stuck in front of a computer for 4 days. So what do you expect, right? It's kind of built into the technology that this stuff will make you depressed and unmotivated and eventually sick. So find your way to manage yourself. But I second your point about, going in nature. And even if you're in a very urban environment, find a tree somewhere. Find a patch of grass if you need to, but everywhere there can be, and even just sunshine, just being outside has benefits. You're more exposed to the sun even on cloudy days, because inside we have these UV blocking windows. So great advice, great conversation. Thanks so much for sharing your joy, also in great spirits. And I hope that many people look at your book. Please remind us the title, and also mention if there's a website where people can follow you, if you have a newsletter, any of that stuff.
Sure. Yeah, I have a website. It's wifi-refugee.com. So Wi-Fi refugee with a hyphen in it. I have a blog on there and podcast lists and links to all my books. And you can get my books on Amazon and on Barnes and Noble. If you don't want to go on Amazon, you could also order from me directly if you're in the US. I can send you a signed copy, even at a discount. So you can get an EPUB version or a Kindle version, and like so. There's all of that.
Perfect.
And I'm looking at maybe doing Substack, but I'm trying to spend less time on the computer instead of more. It's just always like it's tricky trying to promote your work and wanting to be off the internet, But yeah, Wi-Fi Refugee, Plight of the Modern-day Canary is the book title.
Perfect. Well, I'm looking forward to reading it myself, of course, and then I hope that many people are inspired by your story and read these different stories you have in the book. And I know you have, again, like you said, pages and pages of recommendations or things that you've tried. So this is, I think, the type of information that many people in my community are looking over. So I know that this interview will be shared wide and will help so many people. So thanks again for being here today.
Thank you, Nick.
In case this wasn't already obvious, the information provided in this podcast is not intended to replace medical advice. We always recommend that you review this information with a functional medicine practitioner or environmental medicine doctor who is up to date with the latest information on the dangers of EMFs and the best practices around electro-hypersensitivity, just to name these two things. And if you want to support my work, please consider sharing this episode with people you care about. You can also invest in my book, courses, or recommended products found at theemfguy.com. Thank you.